I stood there at my own 30th birthday party, watching my mother hand an envelope to my brother while 200 guests went silent. And that's when I heard her say the words that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family. Welcome to the Mental Grand, where we share real stories of betrayal, justice, and the quiet power of dignity. My name is David, and this is the story of how my parents tried to humiliate me in front of everyone I'd ever known, and how they learned that some men don't break, they rebuild. The venue was the Grand Riverside Hotel in downtown Portland, a place I'd chosen because my parents had always loved the view of the Willamette River. I'd spent nearly $15,000 on this party, inviting family, friends, colleagues from the investment firm where I'd worked my way up to senior analyst, and even some of my clients. My wife Sarah stood beside me, her hand in mine, our 6-year-old daughter Emma playing with her cousins near the dessert table. Everything was perfect until my mother stepped up to the microphone. She didn't ask permission. She just took it from the DJ and tapped it twice. That smile on her face, the one I'd seen 1,000 times growing up, but never quite understood. My father stood beside her, hands in his pockets, looking at the floor. That should have been my first warning. My younger brother Marcus stood on her other side, and he was smiling too, but his smile was different, eager, almost hungry. "Everyone, can I have your attention, please?" my mother announced, her voice echoing through the ballroom. "I know we're here to celebrate David's birthday, but there's something important that needs to be addressed tonight. Something we've known for quite some time, but felt this was the right moment to share." Sarah's hand tightened around mine. I could feel eyes turning toward us, conversations stopping mid-sentence, forks being set down on plates. The room held its breath, and I stood there like a fool, smiling because I thought maybe this was some kind of tribute, some emotional speech about watching me grow up. "David," my mother continued, looking directly at me with those cold blue eyes, "you've always been different from Marcus. Different interests, different personality, different everything, really. And your father and I, well, we've had our suspicions for years." That's when she held up the envelope, and I felt my stomach drop into my shoes. "We took the liberty of having some tests done," she said, her voice carrying that false sweetness that made my skin crawl. "DNA tests, to be specific, because we deserve to know the truth, and honestly, so does everyone here who's been treating you like you're really part of this family." The room erupted in gasps and whispers. I felt Sarah's hand slip from mine as she stepped forward, her voice sharp. "What are you doing? This is insane." But my mother ignored her, opening the envelope with theatrical precision. "The results came back last week. David, according to these certified DNA tests, there is zero biological connection between you and your father, which means for 30 years we've been raising another man's child." I want you to understand something about humiliation. It's not just embarrassment. It's not just shame. It's the feeling of the ground opening beneath your feet while everyone you've ever known watches you fall. It's your brother smirking at you like he's finally won some competition you didn't know you were in. It's your mother's triumphant expression as she hands the papers to your father, who finally looks up at you with something that might be pity or might be relief. But here's what my mother didn't know, what none of them knew in that moment. I wasn't falling. I was watching, calculating, and remembering every single detail of what they were doing to me. "I don't understand," I managed to say, my voice steady despite the chaos swirling around me. "Why would you do this here? Why like this?" My father finally spoke, his voice tired and worn. "Because you needed to know, David, and because, well, there are some things we need to discuss about the family business and the properties, legal things, things that only apply to blood relatives." And there it was, the real reason. Not truth, not honesty, not even cruelty for cruelty's sake. This was about money, about the commercial real estate portfolio my grandfather had built, the properties currently held in a family trust that was set to be divided between his grandchildren when my parents retired. Properties worth somewhere north of $40 million. What happened next would have made them think twice about their little performance if they'd been smart enough to see it coming. I looked around the room at the faces of people I'd known my whole life. Some looked shocked, some looked sympathetic, some just looked uncomfortable, like they wanted to be anywhere else. But then my eyes landed on a small group standing near the back of the room, 4 people who'd arrived late and stood together, watching everything unfold with intense interest. I'd invited them specifically. I'd asked them to come, and not one member of my family had bothered to notice who they were. "Thank you for sharing that, Mom," I said, my voice carrying across the silent room. "I appreciate your commitment to truth and transparency. I really do. In fact, I'm such a big believer in truth that I did some investigating of my own over the past 6 months." My mother's smile faltered, just slightly, but I saw it. "You see, I started having questions back in January when Marcus mentioned something at Sunday dinner about how you and Dad had been talking to lawyers about restructuring the family trust. He said it casually, like it was no big deal, but it got me thinking. Why would you restructure a trust that's been in place for 30 years? So I hired someone to look into it. I gestured toward the back of the room, where one of the 4 people, a woman in her 50s with silver hair pulled back in a professional bun, stepped forward. "This is Margaret Chen. She's a forensic accountant who specializes in family trust litigation. Margaret, would you mind sharing what you found?" The woman nodded, pulling out a tablet. "Mr. Harrison asked me to audit the family trust documents and associated accounts. What I discovered was a systematic diversion of trust assets over the past 8 years, totaling approximately $3.7 million. The room erupted again with gasps and whispers. I felt Sarah's hand slip from mine as she stepped forward, her voice sharp. "What are you doing? This is insane." But my mother ignored her, opening the envelope with theatrical precision. "The results came back last week. David, according to these certified DNA tests, there is 0 biological connection between you and your father, which means for 30 years we've been raising another man's child." You know that moment when you've been playing chess and your opponent suddenly realizes they're in checkmate, that they've been so focused on their strategy that they didn't see yours developing piece by piece? That's what I watched happen on my mother's face. "That's not," she started, but I cut her off. "There's more," I said, and I gestured toward the second person in the group at the back, a distinguished black man in his 60s wearing an expensive suit. "This is James Whitefield. He's the son of my grandfather's business partner from back in 1973. James, why don't you tell everyone what you told me?" If you're still watching, stay with me because what came next exposed 30 years of lies. And if you want to see how this ends, you need to hear every word. And please, subscribe to The Mental Grand because stories like this, stories about real justice, they need to be told. James Whitefield stepped forward, his voice deep and measured. "My father, Bernard Whitefield, was equal partners with Robert Harrison, David's grandfather, when they started Harrison Properties in 1973. They built that company together, 50-50 ownership, everything documented and notarized. When my father died in 1998, your parents convinced my grieving mother to sell his share back to the Harrison family for $250,000. They told her the company was struggling, that the properties were losing value, and this was a generous offer." He paused, letting that sink in. The company was actually worth approximately $12 million at that time. My mother was cheated out of nearly $6 million, and I've spent the last 20 years trying to prove it. I watched my father's face cycle through emotions, confusion, recognition, denial, and finally, fear. Real fear. "David came to me 6 months ago," James continued. "He'd found old partnership documents in his grandfather's papers, documents that told a different story than the one your parents had been telling. He helped me find additional evidence, introduced me to lawyers who could actually take on a case this complex, and together we've built something that I think you're going to want to hear about." The third person stepped forward now, a younger man, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and an expensive watch. My name is Thomas Rivera. I'm a partner at Berkshire and Stone. We handle complex business litigation. Mr. Rivera is my client, and 6 weeks ago, we filed a lawsuit against the Harrison Family Trust, Carathene and Robert Harrison personally, and Marcus Harrison as a co-conspirator in the more recent trust violations. We're seeking full dissolution of the current trust structure, return of all misappropriated funds with interest, and damages for the historical fraud against the Whitefield family. I let the words hang in the air, watching them land like bombs. My mother's triumphant expression had completely crumbled. Marcus looked like he wanted to run. My father just looked old, suddenly, like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. "But David," my mother said, her voice small now, desperate, "you can't do this to your own family." "My own family?" I repeated, and I couldn't keep the edge out of my voice. 30 seconds ago, you announced to 200 people that I'm not actually part of this family, that I'm not your son, that I have no biological connection to any of you. So which is it, Mom? Am I family when it's convenient for you, or am I not family when you want to cut me out of inheritance? Sarah moved back to my side then, her arms sliding around my waist in support. Emma had been taken out by Sarah's mother when things got tense, thankfully, so she wasn't witnessing this nuclear explosion of family drama. "The DNA test," my father said weakly. "It's real, David. We're not lying about that." "I know it's real," I said, and I saw the confusion ripple across their faces. "I've known since I was 16 years old." The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop in that ballroom. "What?" my mother whispered. "I found my birth certificate when I was 16, the original one, not the amended version you gave me when I applied for my first passport. It listed a different father, a man named Peter Sorensen. I did my own DNA test back then, sent away for one of those ancestry kits, and confirmed that Peter Sorensen was my biological father. He died in a car accident 6 months before I was born, and you married Dad when I was 8 months old, and he adopted me when I was 2. I watched my mother's face as understanding dawned. "You knew? All this time?" "All this time," I confirmed. "And I never cared, because Dad raised me. Dad taught me how to throw a baseball. Dad helped me with my homework. Dad walked me through my first investment analysis when I was in college. Biology doesn't make you a father. Being there does. And Dad was there." I looked at my father then, really looked at him. At least, I thought he was. But I guess when $40 million is on the line, 18 years of being a dad doesn't count for much. My father's eyes filled with tears. "David, it wasn't like that." "Then what was it like, Dad? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you and Mom decided that blood matters more than anything else, and you planned this whole humiliation to publicly establish that I'm not a real Harrison, probably to create a legal record you could use to exclude me from the trust. Am I wrong?" The silence was his answer. But they didn't know everything yet, and what I was about to reveal would change the entire game. The fourth person in my carefully assembled group finally stepped forward. She was a woman in her early 60s, with kind eyes and dark hair streaked with gray. She looked nervous but determined. "This is Helen Sorensen," I said, and I watched my mother's face go pale. "She's Peter Sorensen's sister, which makes her my biological aunt. Helen, would you like to explain what you told me last month?" Helen's voice was soft but clear. "My brother Peter was a good man. He and Catherine, David's mother, were engaged to be married. He died 3 weeks before the wedding in a drunk driving accident. He wasn't the drunk driver. He was hit by one. Catherine was already pregnant with David. After Peter died, his parents, my parents, wanted to be part of David's life. They wanted to help Catherine financially. They wanted to know their grandson. But Catherine refused all contact. She cut off all communication with our family." Helen's voice grew stronger. "My parents died never knowing their grandson, never meeting him, never seeing him grow up. They left their entire estate to Peter, and when he died, it should have passed to his heir, to David. But because Catherine cut us off and never told anyone about the inheritance, it's been sitting in probate in a legal limbo for 30 years. I let that information settle over the room like snow. The estate is worth about $2.3 million now, I said quietly. It includes a property in Seattle that's been appreciating nicely, some investments, and Peter's share of his family business, a small manufacturing company that's actually doing quite well. Helen found me through one of those DNA ancestry sites. We matched as aunt and nephew. She reached out, we met, and she told me everything. I looked directly at my mother. You knew about that inheritance, didn't you? You knew Peter's parents wanted to help us, wanted to be part of my life, and you cut them off because you wanted to erase that part of your history. You wanted to pretend I was always a Harrison, always part of Dad's family, because it was easier than dealing with the truth. My mother's lips trembled. I was protecting you. I didn't want you to grow up confused about who your father was. You were protecting yourself, I corrected. You didn't want anyone to know you were pregnant when Peter died. You didn't want people to judge you for moving on so quickly with Dad. And when it became convenient to use my biological status as a weapon, you pulled out that DNA test like it was some kind of trump card. Do you see how years of silence can build into something powerful? How patience and careful planning can turn betrayal into justice? Stay with me, because the courtroom revelations are just beginning. Thomas Rivera stepped forward again. There are a few more things everyone should know. When we filed our suit, we also filed an emergency motion to freeze all assets in the Harrison Family Trust, pending investigation. That motion was granted 3 days ago. No one can access any trust funds, properties, or accounts until this is resolved. I watched Marcus's face go from pale to red. You can't do that. I have expenses. I have investments that depend on that cash flow. Should have thought about that before you helped Mom and Dad steal from the trust, I said simply. Margaret's audit showed you were fully aware of what was happening. You even suggested some of the shell company structures they used to hide the transfers. Marcus lunged towards me, but 2 of his friends caught him, held him back. You're destroying this family. No, I said, my voice ice cold. I'm holding this family accountable. There's a difference. Sarah spoke up then, her voice shot with anger she'd been holding back. Do you have any idea what you've put David through? Do you have any idea what it's like to watch the man you love doubt himself, question whether he's good enough, wonder why his own mother looks at his brother with more pride she's ever shown him? I've watched it for 8 years, ever since we started dating. I've watched you exclude him from family decisions, watched you dismiss his accomplishments, watched you treat him like he was somehow less than Marcus, even though David has built a career and a life that Marcus could never touch. My wife's words echoed through the ballroom, and I fell in love with her all over again in that moment. And now we know why, Sarah continued. It wasn't about David not being good enough. It was about you being so small and so greedy that you couldn't stand the thought of him getting an equal share of something you thought should only go to your biological son. Well, guess what? David's biological father left him something too, and that inheritance doesn't include any of you. I squeezed Sarah's hand, grateful beyond words. Then I looked around the room at all the people who'd witnessed this disaster of an evening. I want everyone here to understand something. I didn't plan this to humiliate my parents the way they tried to humiliate me. I planned this because they left me no choice. When Marcus mentioned the trust restructuring, I knew something was wrong. When I started investigating and found the evidence of theft, I knew I had to act. And when I realized they were planning to use my biological status to cut me out entirely, I knew I had to protect myself and make sure the truth came out. I pulled an envelope from inside my jacket pocket. This is a letter from my lawyer. It outlines a settlement offer. The Whitfield family gets back 50% ownership of all properties and assets that descended from the original partnership. The stolen trust funds are returned with interest. Marcus is removed from any position of authority in the trust or the family business, and the trust is restructured to be administered by an independent third party with equal distributions to all Robert Harrison Sr.'s grandchildren, regardless of biology. I handed the envelope to my father. You have 72 hours to accept these terms. If you don't, we proceed to full litigation, and I promise you, you will win, and you will lose everything. Not just money, not just properties, but your reputation, your standing in this community, and whatever shred of dignity you think you still have. My father took the envelope with shaking hands. He looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something broken and ashamed and lost. I'm sorry, David. I'm so sorry. I know, I said, and I was surprised to find I meant it. But sorry doesn't fix this. Actions fix this. Choices fix this. You have 72 hours to make the right choice. I turned to Sarah. Let's go home. We walked out of that ballroom with our heads high, leaving behind 200 stunned guests and a family that would never be the same. Behind me, I heard my mother crying, heard Marcus shouting, heard the explosion of conversations as everyone tried to process what they'd just witnessed. But I didn't look back. I'd spent 30 years looking back, trying to understand why I never quite fit, why I was never quite enough. I was done looking back. The next 3 days were some of the longest of my life. I went to work, attended meetings, reviewed investment portfolios, and pretended everything was normal while I waited to see if my parents would sign the settlement. Sarah was my rock through all of it, and Emma, bless her innocent heart, just kept asking when we could have Grandma and Grandpa over for dinner again. I didn't know how to explain to a 6-year-old that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally are the same people who hurt you the most. I didn't know how to explain. On the morning of the third day, my phone rang. It was my father. "We'll sign," he said, his voice hollow. "Your mother and I will sign the settlement. Marcus is fighting it, but he doesn't have a choice. The evidence is too strong." "Good," I said simply. "David," my father said, and his voice cracked. "Can we talk? Just you and me?" I thought about saying no. I thought about all the reasons I should just hang up, let the lawyers handle everything, and never speak to him again. But despite everything, despite the betrayal and the humiliation and the greed, this was still the man who taught me to ride a bike, who sat through every baseball game even when I spent more time in the dugout than on the field, who helped me move into my college dorm and my first apartment, and the house where Sarah and I now lived. "Okay," I said, "tomorrow, lunch, that diner on Hawthorne you used to take me to." "I'll be there," he said, and hung up. The diner was exactly as I remembered it, slightly worn but clean, with red vinyl booths and a jukebox in the corner that probably hadn't worked since 1995. My father was already there when I arrived, sitting in our old booth, the one by the window where we used to sit every Saturday morning when I was a kid. He looked terrible. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face gray with exhaustion. He'd aged a decade in less than a week. I slid into the booth across from him, ordered coffee from the waitress who'd been working there since I was 10, and waited. "I don't know where to start," my father said finally. "Start with the truth," I suggested. "That seems like a good place." He nodded, staring down at his hands. "It started about 10 years ago. The economy crashed, property values tanked, and suddenly the trust was worth a lot less than it had been. Your mother, she panicked. She'd always had this vision of Marcus taking over the business, building it into something even bigger than what your grandfather had created. And she was terrified that if the trust was split equally between you and Marcus, there wouldn't be enough left for Marcus to have full control. So you started stealing from it," I said flatly. "We called it borrowing," my father said weakly. "We told ourselves we'd pay it back once the properties recovered. We created those shell companies to hold some of the assets separately, thinking we could move them back later without anyone noticing. And Marcus, he was struggling with his own business. He needed capital, so we helped him." You helped him by stealing my inheritance, I said. My father flinched. Yes, that's what we did. And then the properties did recover, values went back up, and instead of fixing what we'd done, we just kept going. It became easier to take more than to admit what we'd already taken. He finally looked up at me, and I saw real pain in his eyes. And your mother, she convinced herself that it was justified, that you weren't really a Harrison, not by blood, so you didn't really deserve an equal share. She pushed for the DNA test, she planned that whole scene at your birthday, thinking that if she could publicly establish your biological status, it would give us legal cover to restructure the trust in Marcus's favor. What he said next, I'll never forget, and it's why some part of me might eventually forgive him. But David, my father said, his voice breaking, I want you to know that I never stopped thinking of you as my son. Biology doesn't matter to me. It never has. When I met your mother, you were just a baby, and I loved you from the first moment I held you. I adopted you because I wanted to, not because I had to. And every moment of your childhood, every baseball game and school play and graduation, those are my proudest memories. Tears were running down his face now. I don't know how I let her convince me to go along with this. I don't know how I let greed and fear turn me into someone who would hurt you. But I did, and I have to live with that. I just need you to know that when I look at you, I see my son. I see the boy I raised and the man you became, and I'm proud of you, even though I have no right to be. I sat there, holding my coffee cup, feeling emotions I couldn't name churning in my chest. Anger and hurt and grief and love, all tangled together into something painful and complicated and real. You broke my heart, I said quietly. Both of you. You took the one thing a child should never have to question, the security of knowing they're loved and valued, and you turned it into a weapon. You made me stand in front of everyone I know and feel like I was less than, like I was an imposter in my own family. I know, my father said, and I'm sorry doesn't begin to cover it. No, it doesn't. We sat in silence for a long moment. The waitress refilled our coffee. The jukebox in the corner suddenly clicked to life, playing an old country song about loss and regret. It felt appropriate. The settlement stands, I said finally. Every term, non-negotiable. The Whitfield family gets what they're owed. The trust gets restructured. Marcus loses control. Those things don't change no matter how sorry you are. I understand, my father said. But, and I saw hope flicker in his eyes, I'm not walking away from you completely, not yet, maybe not ever, because you're right about one thing. Biology doesn't make a father. Being there does. And you were there for 18 years, you were there. That has to count for something. My father let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. Thank you, David, thank you. I'm not promising anything, I warned. I'm not saying things go back to normal. I'm not saying Mom and I will ever have a real relationship again because I don't know if I can forgive what she did. But you and me, maybe we can figure something out, eventually. That's more than I deserve, my father said. Yeah, I agreed. It probably is. If you've stayed with me this far, thank you. Because this is where you learn that justice isn't always clean and simple, and sometimes the people who hurt us are also the people we love. Before I finish, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button, drop a comment about how you would handle this situation, and subscribe to The Mental Grand, because these stories matter. Stories about holding people accountable while still holding on to your humanity, they matter. Now, let me tell you how this all ended. The settlement was signed 2 days after the birthday party. James Whitfield got his 50% ownership back, plus nearly $4 million in compensated damages for the decades his family had been cheated. The stolen trust funds were returned with interest. Marcus was removed from all positions of authority and given a modest but fair distribution that he'd have to manage on his own. And the trust was restructured exactly as I demanded, with an independent administrator and equal treatments for all grandchildren. Helen Sorensen and I worked with lawyers to claim my biological father's estate. That $2.3 million, plus the property in Seattle and the manufacturing company shares, came to me free and clear. I set up college funds for Emma and any future children Sarah and I might have. I donated a significant portion to organizations that help children who've lost parents, in memory of Peter Sorensen, the father I never got to know, but who gave me life. My mother and I haven't spoken since the birthday party. She sent a letter once, full of justifications and excuses, and a half-hearted apology that mostly blamed everyone else for misunderstanding her intentions. I read it once and filed it away. Maybe someday we'll talk, but I'm not holding my breath. Marcus tried to contest the settlement, hired his own lawyers, made a lot of noise about family loyalty and betrayal. It went nowhere. The evidence was too strong, the legal ground too solid. Last I heard, he'd moved to Arizona and was trying to start some kind of cryptocurrency investment fund. I wished him well from a distance and made a mental note to never invest in cryptocurrency. My father and I have lunch about once a month now. We don't talk about the trust or the betrayal or the birthday party. We talk about Emma, about Sarah's work as a physical therapist, about the Trailblazers and whether they'll ever make the playoffs again, about movies and books and the weather. It's surface level, maybe, but it's something. It's a start. Sarah says I'm being too generous, that I should cut it off completely. Maybe she's right, but I think about Emma, about how she loves her grandpa, and how he lights up when he sees her, and I think maybe some relationships are worth salvaging even when they're damaged. Maybe forgiveness isn't about forgetting or excusing, maybe it's just about deciding that the past doesn't have to completely define the future. The investment firm where I work promoted me to partner 8 months after the birthday party incident. Turns out my colleagues had been impressed by how I handled a complex family legal situation while still maintaining my professional responsibilities. They saw someone who could keep their head in a crisis, who could think strategically under pressure. The promotion came with a significant raise and a corner office with a view of Mount Hood on clear days. I used part of my biological father's inheritance to start a scholarship fund at Portland State University for students who've lost parents. It's called the Peter Sorensen Memorial Scholarship, and it pays full tuition plus living expenses for 2 students each year. Helen Sorensen and I serve on the selection committee together. It's become one of my proudest accomplishments, this way of honoring a man I never knew, but who clearly was loved and valued by his family. Emma is 7 now, and she's starting to ask questions about why we don't see Grandma anymore, why Grandpa comes to visit but never talks about Grandma, why Uncle Marcus isn't around. Sarah and I have decided to tell her the truth when she's older, in age-appropriate ways, because secrets and lies are what created this mess in the first place. She deserves to grow up knowing that family is complicated, that people sometimes hurt each other, but that doesn't mean she has to accept being hurt, or that she can't hold people accountable. The Harrison family properties are doing well under the new management structure. James Whitfield brought in some innovative ideas about sustainable development and affordable housing initiatives that have actually increased both the social impact and the profitability of the portfolio. He and I serve as co-trustees now, and we've developed a genuine friendship built on mutual respect and shared values. His son is about Emma's age, and the kids play together sometimes. It's funny how life circles back around, how the sins of one generation can be corrected in the next. I think about my mother sometimes, usually late at night when I can't sleep. I think about how fear and greed can twist someone into a version of themselves that their younger self wouldn't recognize. I think about how she must have loved me once, when I was a baby, when she was grieving Peter and trying to build a new life. I think about when exactly that love became conditional, when it became something she could weaponize or withdraw based on her own agenda. And I think about my grandfather, the original Robert Harrison, the man who built that real estate empire from nothing. I wonder what he would think about what his daughter-in-law did, how she betrayed his business partner's family, how she tried to cheat one grandson to favor another. I'd like to think he'd be disappointed in her and proud of me for standing up for what was right, but I'll never know. What I do know is this: dignity matters. Self-respect matters. Standing up for yourself matters, even when it means standing against your own family. My parents tried to humiliate me in front of everyone I knew, tried to use my biological status as a weapon to cut me out of my inheritance. They thought I'd be too ashamed or too passive to fight back. They thought wrong. Because here's what I learned through all of this. You teach people how to treat you. If you accept disrespect, you'll get more disrespect. If you accept betrayal, you'll get more betrayal. But if you stand up, if you demand accountability, if you use the tools of law and justice and truth, you can change the dynamic. You can shift the power. You can win. Not everyone has the resources I had. Not everyone can hire forensic accountants and business litigation attorneys. I recognize that privilege and I try to use it responsibly. But everyone has the ability to refuse to be diminished, to refuse to accept being treated as less than, to insist on their own worth and dignity. My father asked me once, during one of our lunches, if I'd ever really forgive him. I told him the truth. I don't know. Some days I think maybe I already have, at least partially. Other days the anger and hurt come rushing back, and I remember standing in that ballroom, hearing my mother's voice announcing that I wasn't really family, seeing the smirk on Marcus's face. But forgiveness isn't a light switch. It's not something you turn on once and then it's done forever. It's a process, a choice you make every day, sometimes multiple times a day. It's deciding that you won't let bitterness poison your life, that you won't give the people who hurt you the power to define your future. Sarah's pregnant again. We found out last month. Another girl, due in September. We're naming her Grace, because if there's anything this whole experience has taught me, it's that grace, the kind you give others and the kind you give yourself, is essential to moving forward. Emma is thrilled about becoming a big sister. She's already planning what they'll play together, what she'll teach her, how she'll protect her. Watching her excitement, I think about the family we're building, Sarah and me and our daughters. A family built on truth and respect and unconditional love. A family where nobody has to question their worth or their place. That's the real victory, isn't it? Not the money I recovered, not the legal battles I won, not even the way I stood up to my parents' betrayal. The real victory is building something better, something stronger, something that doesn't carry forward the dysfunction and pain of previous generations. My father will be part of Grace's life, carefully, with boundaries, but part of it. Marcus won't be, at least not now. My mother won't be unless something significant changes. These are choices I've made consciously, deliberately, based on what's best for my family and what I can handle emotionally. And I'm at peace with those choices. There are people who will say I should have forgiven everyone, should have kept the family together at all costs, should have pursued maximum damages in court, should have destroyed everyone involved. Those people didn't stand in my shoes that night, didn't feel what I felt, didn't have to make the choices I had to make. There are other people who will say I was too soft, that I should have cut off my father completely, should have pursued maximum damages in court, should have destroyed everyone involved. Those people don't understand that justice isn't the same as vengeance, that you can hold people accountable while still holding on to your own humanity. I chose a middle path, the path that felt right to me, and I'm okay with that, more than okay. I'm proud of how I handled it. I'm proud that I stood up for myself without becoming cruel. I'm proud that I pursued justice without sacrificing my integrity. I'm proud that I protected my family while still leaving room for healing and growth. Before I close, I want to say something directly to anyone watching this who's experienced family betrayal, who's been treated as less than, who's had their worth questioned by the very people who should have valued them most. You are enough. Your worth isn't determined by biology or money or anyone else's opinion. Your worth is inherent, and anyone who can't see that is revealing their own limitations, not yours. Stand up for yourself. Use the tools available to you. Demand accountability. Insist on respect. And if people can't or won't give you what you deserve, give it to yourself by walking away, by creating a life that reflects your values rather than accommodating their dysfunction. It won't be easy. The path I took wasn't easy. There were nights I couldn't sleep, days I questioned everything, moments I wanted to just give up and let them win because fighting seemed too hard. But I'm so glad I didn't. I'm so glad I stood my ground, fought my battles, and came out the other side with my dignity intact. That's what the mental grand is all about. Stories of people who faced injustice and chose to fight back intelligently, who experienced betrayal and chose to seek justice rather than just accepting it, who understood that quiet strength and strategic planning can be more powerful than loud anger and impulsive reactions. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think or feel something in your own life, do me a favor. Hit that like button, leave a comment sharing your own experiences or thoughts, and subscribe to The Mental Grand. Because these stories, these real stories about real people facing real challenges and finding real solutions, they need to be told and heard and remembered. My name is David Harrison. I'm a father, a husband, an investment analyst, a son to the man who raised me regardless of biology, and a proud member of both the Harrison and Sorensen family. I'm someone who learned that family isn't just about blood, it's about respect and love and showing up. And I'm someone who learned that you can pursue justice without losing your soul, that you can hold people accountable while still holding on to your own values. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being part of the Mental Grand community. And remember, justice doesn't always come quickly or easily, but when it comes, when you fought for it the right way and won, the feeling is something no amount of money can buy.